future. And so we spent the whole night developing that plot. And that night, when I was 11 years old, I wrote the first chapter. And then I put it down for 3 or 4 years because, you know, I was 11 years old, life got in the way, and I didn't think that I was old enough to become a writer yet. But then when I was in 7th grade, so this was just a year later, my dad came to me. They had noticed my passion for reading and writing. They noticed my talent, the potential that I had. And so my dad asked me if I wanted to work on a book with him. You know, I was in 7th grade. I thought, what experience do I have to write a book? So what we did is combine fiction stories with nonfiction teaching points. So I wrote the fiction and he wrote the nonfiction to teach American principles to students. And then after we published that first book, we started getting a lot of media press, which, you know, I was in 7th grade. It was both terrifying and exciting. We pushed our message and they responded. I did lots of local television and local radio, which were some of my favorites because I got to, you know, talk to people in my hometown about what I was passionate about. And then we were invited to New York City to be on John Stossel and Fox and Friends. So that was exciting and terrifying all in one. So I really enjoyed that. I got to spend a lot of time with my dad, which is something I didn't expect to come out of writing. And it's one of my favorite things that came out of my writing is he and I became really close and we got to spend a lot of time together. Well, when we weren't butting heads, we're very similar. I received book awards, traveled to Los Angeles, New York, Washington, and that was really fun to get to do that with my family. But the press wasn't always everything it seemed to be. It was a very stressful environment, especially in New York. When one of the interviews we went to, we got there, we were really excited, all jazzed up, and then they sat us in the green room and said, "We'll be with you soon." And then like 2 hours later, it was finally time to go on, and by that point we were, you know, tired and we had lost our mojo. So it was a little more difficult than I expected it would be, but I think it really refined my public speaking skills and made me really comfortable doing things like this. So following the press with Our Best Tomorrow, my dad wanted me to write another book with him. But what I really loved to read was young adult fantasy. And I mentioned earlier that I like to transport readers to another world, and that's what I wanted to do. So I picked the Ascension back up when I was 14 years old. So that first chapter that I wrote 3 years beforehand, I picked it up, realized the first chapter was horrible, and rewrote it. I built writing into my daily schedule, just like I did with homework and soccer practice and theater. I would write for about an hour a day whenever I could, and I loved it. And then I had my first bout of writer's block, which is everything that everyone says it is. It's so frustrating. And how I deal with writer's block is I just write through it. So I know some people stop, take a few days, and I've tried to do that, and it just frustrated me more that I wasn't getting anywhere. So sometimes I just wrote through it, and then I would have to go back and delete, 4,000 or 5,000 words once I finally figured out where the story was going. When I was 15 years old, we sent the Ascension to the editor, and she tore it apart. I thought that the Ascension was God's gift to the fantasy world. I was so excited about it, and she tore it apart. In hindsight, it was so much better because of it, and I'm so grateful for all the work that we did during that editing process, no matter how painful it was at the time. And then on October 9th, 2016, the Ascension launched at Joseph Beth in Crestview Hills. This picture over here is from the book launch. That's my soccer team with me. I had to miss soccer practice that day for the book launch, and they all came after practice to support me. Side note, I'm really sad about Joseph Beth in Crestview Hills, that it closed. So that's a bummer. I love doing book launches there. The Deception. So this is the second book in the Ascension series. I had always known I wanted to make the Ascension into a series from the very beginning. I like to read a lot of series, and I like to get to know characters over the course of a few books, 4 or 5, and so I wanted to make the Ascension into a trilogy. And I began working on the Deception immediately following my work on the Ascension and all those signings. But I quickly realized that writing a sequel was much more difficult than writing the first book. With the first book, you have a blank slate. You can do whatever you want. No one can tell you, what to do with that story because it's completely yours. But with the Deception, I had to go back and make sure that everything lined up with what I had put in the first book. It was no longer, oh, well, let me just make this up. I had to make sure what I was doing aligned with what I had said in the first book. And in order to try to mitigate that frustration, I tried to be more diligent with my planning. I'm not typically a planner. I don't make very detailed storylines at all. And so I tried to do that. Didn't completely go as planned, but it was a good idea at the time. I felt the characters begin to grow as I grew. At this point in time, when the Deception came out, I was 18 years old. I started writing the Ascension when I was 11. So I was doing a lot of growing, and the 3 main characters, Felix, Desdemona, and Jinx, were doing a lot of growing right alongside me. So it can be done. This is the second book that my dad and I worked on in the Students Leading America duology, sorry. And then it came out following the release of The Deception, so I was kind of bouncing back and forth. This book holds a special place in my heart because it taught students ideals through the story of my grandparents. They grew up in Western Kentucky, didn't have much, and made their children's lives better. So basing a story off someone's life was much more difficult than creating characters from scratch. My grandparents were some of the first people to read the book, and I tried to do their story justice. I like to think that I did. So that was really rewarding to get to tell their story to other readers. The Redemption. So this is the book Leanne was talking about, that it's on order. This is the final book in the Ascension series. It talks about, it just wraps up the Anchor triplet story, and it was all kinds of emotional to complete it. I cried at the end of the book because I wasn't ready to let the characters go. I loved spending time with them in my own head. I considered them my friends in a way. And I didn't want to let them go, but I knew it was time for the story to end. And so as an author, I had to let it go, send it off to the publisher, and say, my trilogy is finished. But it's been really difficult because it was supposed to come out in May. But then we had some printing issues because the printer closed because of COVID-19. And so the printing was pushed back, a month at a time. It was April, and then it was May, and then it was June, and then it was August. So we finally got a shipment of 50 copies of The Redemption like 3 days ago. So that's really exciting. I'm excited to start getting those out to readers. And a whole nother issue, book signings. Bookstores were closed for a while. That was sad. And then I'm not sure how signings are going to work. I like to do a lot of signings, especially before Christmas. I love to get to know readers and talk to other writers, but I don't know how that's going to look, in the new environment with social distancing and everything. So we'll see. So what's next? Like I said, the Ascension series is finished. Who knows, maybe in 40 years I'll write a sequel or something, but for right now it's finished. And so I plan to graduate from undergrad at UK and attend medical school and do that for the next 8 years of my life in school. But I do hope to continue writing. I draw a lot of inspiration from the places I've been and the people I've met. So these pictures here, I actually recently came back from vacation a few weeks ago, and we went to South Carolina, and there was this it was called Brook Green Gardens. And there was this art show that included installments of Light by this artist, David Monroe, I think. And they had this field of light here, and they were just a bunch of light bulbs stuck in the field, and it was pitch dark, and all you could see was the field of color. And it made me want to write. Seeing that made me think, I miss writing. I want to create something. So who knows, maybe I'll draw from that memory in a few years when I start working on another series. So a few tips real quick for all those on this call that are writers. Don't rush the process. Writing and publishing doesn't happen overnight. There are so many steps, so many rounds of editing, and then so many communications with the publisher, and it gets frustrating, but you can't rush it. Realize that it needs to run its course. It needs to take its time. Don't get caught up in your pride like I did with the Ascension. I was really frustrated, thought it was the best book ever, but like I said, it was much better because of the criticism that they gave me. So take that to heart. Know when to give in to the criticism, know when to make some changes, but also know when to stand your ground. Know when your story is yours and that's how you want it to go. Don't let the story drag on. I said it was really hard to let go of the characters at the redemption, but understand when it is time to end it. There's nothing worse than a great book that goes on for way too long and you start to bore your readers. You want to end strong. Don't forget why you're writing. Like I said, not everything about the process is fun. I didn't always enjoy the stress of the media. I didn't always enjoy the rounds of editing, but it's important to remember why I was doing it, and it was that I loved reading and I wanted to share my stories with writers, and I felt like I could reach them by doing that. And then number 5, and this is my favorite tip, don't stop reading. When I was working on the Ascension series, I went through about a year and a half where I stopped reading for a little bit because I was writing so much. And I really regret it because I really think the best way to improve your writing skills is by reading and by soaking up as much of other authors' writing as you can. All right, so that's all I have for you guys. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then we have some time for questions. I guess you can send them in the chat box or unmute yourself. I'm not sure how Leanne wants to do the questions, whenever you guys are comfortable with.
Okay.
You should be unmuted now, Leanne. I don't think you're muted now. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I tried to do unmute all, and I don't think it worked. So if anyone wants to unmute themselves, go ahead. I did press the record a little late, so I'm sorry. I missed like the first slide or two.
That's okay.
But we got basically all your information. We missed my introduction, but I mean, who needs that really? That's totally fine. That's not included. I guess I'll get us started with the first question, and then anyone else feel free to jump in. You can type one in, or you can ask Lauren directly. But I was going to ask, what was your favorite part and your least favorite part of the writing and publishing journey?
So I guess I'll start with my least favorite part so we can end on a high. My least favorite part was probably the editing. I thought it was going to be, quick, one round of editing, and then the book is just ready to go to print, and, I'll have it in my hand in the next month or so, ready to sell to readers. That's not at all what it was like. It took 4 or 5 rounds of editing. I read the book what felt like a million times by the end. My whole family had read the book. My friends had read the book, and finally, after we got all that done, it took another 2 months to get copies of the book. But, just got to trust the process. Can't rush it. My favorite part is definitely meeting readers. I guess this was last year when I was signing with The Deception. I had a reader run into Barnes & Noble. She was probably 12 or 13 maybe, and she ran in through the double doors and was holding a copy of The Ascension. And she came up to me and said, I bought your book at a signing last year and I loved it and I read it 4 times and I want the deception. And it was, you could tell like the corners of the page were, you know, a little turned as, you know, she had been opening it. There was a little crease on the spine. So that really meant a lot to me to know that there are readers that are reading and loving my stories, and I got to share that with them.
That's awesome.
I think there's a question in the chat box. Did any outside influences change how you thought your story should go beyond editors, such as fan opinions? That's a good question. Fan opinions, not really. My dad opinions, probably. So he was the first one to read all of my writing. I would send the chapter to him after I finished it. And like I said, I'm not a big planner for stories. And so sometimes, you know, after he would read a chapter, he would come up to me and he would say, look, it's your story. You can do whatever you want with it, but consider this. And, you know, probably 90% of his ideas, I was like, no, I know where I'm going with it. But every now and then he would have a stroke of genius. And I was like, yes, that's exactly the idea I needed. So yes, in that sense.
How hard was it for you to find a publisher, and how many times did you approach different publishers?
So with the Ascension, we went straight to Headline Books because we had worked with them with Our Best Tomorrow. And we got into contact with Headline Books because my dad worked on a book with them previously. So it goes back a few books there. With The Deception, we tried to shop the series to a few different publishers, probably 3 or 4, and it ended up was just taking a long time, and we wanted to get the book out for readers. And so we ended up going with Headline Books again, which they've been really good. I've enjoyed working with them a lot. Here's another question in the chat. It says, once you were published, how did you get publicity for your book? That's a really good question. It's really difficult. I find that you have to run with your relationships that you already have. So I was lucky in the sense my dad has lots of connections in Cincinnati, and so he was able to reach out to, you know, different local news stations, and I would reach out with him and say, hey, I'm a local author. I love writing. I have this message that I want to share to students about the importance of reading and writing. Can I do a segment? And more often than not, they were excited about it, and they were really excited to meet me and to help share my message. So I find that the community is very supportive of, you know, local artists. There's another question that says, do you feel like your characters are influenced by your friends and family, or really just iterations of you? A little bit of both. I would say when I started writing The Ascension, I definitely based my characters off of people in my life. But like I said, they grew as I grew. So The Ascension was kind of like their mold, just the outline. And as the series went on, I let them develop however I saw fit. So they kind of branched off from their original molds of the people in my life and became someone completely different based off, you know, the story and what happened. So it's really interesting to watch them grow.
I have a question about your dad. What does he do?
He's an attorney. He's an attorney, actually, but he loves to write. He's someone who can't sit still, so he comes home from his day job of writing and then writes some more.
Okay. Okay, that kind of makes sense. The whole civics message in your series that you did with him, that kind of makes sense there. I thought maybe he was a teacher, but attorney makes a lot of sense too. And then the process of getting the covers illustrated, how does that go? Do you ever have anything to say about what that cover is going to look like?
I do. So we have a local artist do my covers. He's really great. And we reach out to him. His name's Kevin Kelly. And we reach out to him right kind of after I finish the book, when we're starting to think about covers and it's going through editing and everything. And I usually have a rough idea in my head. and I'll send him an email and say, hey, this is what I want. I would draw it, but I'm a horrible artist, so it wouldn't come out like I would expect it to. And then he takes that idea and runs with it and works his magic. Usually it takes about 3 or 4 rounds of, I really like what you did here, but what if we changed this? And it always turns out really well. And I love how the covers have turned out.
Okay, well, that's cool. Yeah, a lot of times I think the authors and illustrators have literally nothing to do with each other. The publisher finds the illustrator for the book and says the due date, basically, and that's the last you hear of it. So it's nice that you were able to have that relationship. That's pretty.
Yeah, he's really nice. He did a lot of publicity stuff also. Like he took, these are really fun, images of famous buildings in Cincinnati and photoshopped the Ascension cover onto them.
Oh.
So it gave me some stuff to post on social media. So he's really awesome. Kevin Kelly's his name, if anyone's looking for some cover art or any other art.
You said he's local, so like Northern Kentucky local, Cincinnati, or?
Cincinnati, I believe, just across the river.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. There's another question, 2 questions actually. The first one says, do you feel like your characters are, it says, do you think being a writer makes you more critical of other writers, making it harder to enjoy reading? Yes and no. That's a really good question. I think it makes me more appreciative of other writers, especially when I see like a typo in the book, because how many rounds of editing the books go through and there are still typos. So I understand how hard it is. I almost think I'm more forgiving if the book maybe isn't, as great as I think it could be, because maybe they were rushed with a publishing deadline, or maybe they, didn't have a really great editor. So I think it actually makes me more lenient. And I still love reading. I read all the time before I go to bed, on my lunch break at work. Rachel said, do you have a favorite character in your books? And if so, who is it and why? I have a lot of favorite characters in my books. It bounces around. So the 3 main triplets in my book are Desdemona, Felix, and Jinx. And they're all very different. I think my favorite character is maybe Jinx. She's very sassy. She was so fun to write. She doesn't take, orders or demands for anyone. She's very independent, sassy. And I just really like that. I think she's someone that people can look up to.
Do you think you'll take life has a way of kind of doing things that you didn't expect. So you've got this plan to be a doctor, which is amazingly difficult, and that's a difficult road ahead, but you managed to somehow write these books when you were amazingly busy as well. I mean, if it's kind of therapeutic for you, don't you think you'll kind of maybe come up with a new idea and just be compelled to write anyway, no matter how busy you are?
Mm-hmm. I do think so. I think I tend to feel more inspired when I see other artists' work, no matter like the mode. So when I said I went to the gardens and saw that artist's work, it made me want to create. Mm-hmm. So I think when I'm at school, sometimes exposing myself to so much, black and white science kind of turns my brain in a different direction. But when I see other artists' work, I'm really inspired to write.
Yeah, gotcha.
Have you written any medical type articles or anything like that at this point?
I have. I do a lot of research with the Marquis Cancer Center at UK. I do cancer literacy research, so teaching students, especially in Appalachia, Kentucky, about cancer and about cancer risk factors and stuff like that. So I've published 3 papers on that now with my research mentor. Dr. Vanderford is so awesome, and he's helped me a lot with that. So it's definitely a different writing style, one that I'm sure I will be exploring more as I get older and go into medicine.
Mm-hmm. We had a children's literature conference in October, I think it was. And so this might make you feel like, okay, this could be me in someday. A woman from a doctor. She's a medical doctor from, I think, up in the east, maybe Connecticut. Her name is Sayantani Gupta, and she has 3 children. She's a medical doctor. She has a busy life, and she is writing juvenile fiction fantasy series. And her thing is that, so her name is Sayantani Gupta. She is of descent from the country of India. And she felt like there were not people in books that were like her. In a sense, when she loved reading as a child, and she's probably in her mid-40s, but everything she read culturally was very different from who she was. And so finally she got to the point that she has children, and she's like, I want them to be able to read stories about people like them and their culture, but there aren't any. I guess I'm going to have to write them myself. So she's been writing this nice series. And so, yeah, I think there's, you know, there's just so many things that compel people to write, but then when you get started, you find that this is sort of where my heart lies. And I've always heard that people that are true artists can't not do it. So a writer can't not write. An artist can't not paint. So that's kind of what I see in you, is that all of these things that you do that are so amazing and would keep anybody else to just say, I'm too busy, but you can't not do it. So I see lots of good stuff coming out of your pen in the future, because I think you're that kind of writer.
Well, I hope so. I definitely think I have more stories to tell. Not all of them have come to me yet, but when they do, I'm sure, hoping I can make them into something worthwhile.
Yeah, cool. Nice. All right. Do we have any other questions? Does anybody here who has read her books have a favorite book? Oh, Rachel has one. Has anybody written fan fiction of your books?
Not that I know of, but funny story about fan fiction. I went through a phase in middle school where I wrote a lot of One Direction fan fiction. So that exists somewhere on the internet. You know, my time between starting the Ascension when I was 11 and finishing the Ascension when I was 16, probably 3 or 4 years of that was spent in a fan fiction phase where my friends and I all wrote different One Direction fan fiction.
Did you have to research anything like really weird when you were writing your trilogy? Did you have to like Google something like, I can't believe I'm Googling this, just to add something interesting to your book?
Definitely. I never write about places that I haven't been. I think it's really difficult to describe a place if you've never been there. So like the Ascension is set in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The Deception is set in Las Vegas. And the Redemption is set kind of all over. They hop around to different places. But I did, especially for the Deception in Las Vegas, did a lot of researching about different attractions in Las Vegas because I went when I was younger. And I wanted to make it as realistic as possible. So hopefully one day people will go to Las Vegas and be, oh my gosh, the Anchor triplets in the Deception did this thing. And then we'll want to do it because of it.
Cool.
That's awesome. All right. Well, we are pretty much at the end of our time period. So if anyone has any last minute questions.
I'd encourage everybody to check the library's catalog for her books and put them on hold so you guys can get copies, or you can, of course, order them on Amazon. And I assume that even though we don't have a Joseph Beth here in Crespi Hills anymore, there is still one in Cincinnati and Hyde Park. And there is Barnes & Noble, I think, is still open in Florence. I don't think they've closed. So you could get it at a bookstore.
Lauren, your books are available as ebooks as well, right?
They are, yes. The redemption right now, although we're working on getting paper copies to Amazon and to the library and to bookstores, is available for ebook download. If anyone is just, really itching to read it, you can read it on ebook.
I didn't know that because we haven't ordered it yet as an ebook, so we need to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. I appreciate this, and thank you everyone for attending. I feel like we learned a lot of interesting things, and this was really interesting. So, Lauren, thank you for doing this. I'm sure it's just crazy doing things in this time with COVID, but I'm glad we were able to still have this event.
Me too. Thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate it.
Best of luck to you.
Thank you.
A great school year.
Yeah.